Indonesia over any period of time knows that that's always a fascinating topic. The relationship's been likened to many things. Probably the most appropriate is a roller coaster. But of course we're talking about relationship here at government to government level. The relationship between Australians and Indonesians at the person-to-person level is a much different kettle of fish. And I think that's always a warm relationship, whatever is happening in the political sphere. So I'm going to ask Steve to talk, so we'll talk for about half an hour, 25 minutes, and then we'll have question and answer after that. So I encourage you to ask lots of questions. Steve is a lecturer in Indonesian in the School of Humanities here at the university. He's been with us for about 6 years, and prior to that was in at UNE in Armidale, and has a long experience in Indonesia going back to his undergraduate days. So it's well good to speak to you tonight. So even school days, yeah. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Steve to address us on this very interesting topic. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming out on a winter's evening. It's not always easy. Thankfully, though, the weather's a little bit better now than it's been in the last couple of weeks. I also like to again thank the Deputy Lord Mayor for finding the time to come here, and thank all you students for coming out in the middle of the exam period. I'd like to begin by recognising a few problems with our topic tonight. And the first is, whenever you're talking about relationships between countries, you're talking at a level of generality that can lead to the use of stereotypes, so that people can be reduced, people or individuals or groups can be reduced to stereotypes. I want to try and avoid that if I can tonight, even though we will most definitely be talking about stereotypes. Okay, both Australia and Indonesia, of course, are large and diverse countries. Indonesia, I would say, is even more diverse than Australia, perhaps not exactly in terms of size, although it is very big. So the spread of islands there, you can see, because you can see the top of Australia there, is roughly the same size as Western Europe and covers 17,500 islands, a population of 255 million people, more than 300 ethnic groups. People roll this sort of stuff off all the time. And I'm sure a lot of people here tonight are aware of those sort of statistics. Now, tonight, I want to, when we're talking about a relationship, of course, we're talking about, like I say, very complex and a diverse phenomenon. So we're actually talking about the accumulation of a myriad of different relationships. I'm going to be speaking mainly from an Australian point of view, and I know there's a number of Indonesian students here tonight from the Indonesian Students Association, so I just ask that you perhaps be a bit aware of that. I'm trying to do so in a way that is sensitive to looking at things from the other end as well, and I think that's a productive space for us to be trying to inhabit during our discussion as well. So in the spirit of friendship and in that spirit of solidarity, sorry, I better not walk away from the microphone just yet. I'd like to say a few words in Indonesian. So, pertama-tama saya mengucapkan terima kasih kepada teman-teman Indonesia yang datang malam ini, dan saya persilakan teman-teman nanti dalam diskusi dan dalam sesi tanya jawab pakailah bahasa Indonesia. Kami juga sediakan ringkasan dalam bahasa Indonesia, ringkasan dari kuliah ini. I was just saying that in that spirit of friendship, we've prepared a summary of today's paper in Indonesian, and which is up in the top right-hand corner if you haven't already got one. And we invite people to speak in whatever language they feel comfortable with in the question and answer and discussion later on. It might also be worthwhile saying at the very beginning that even though we framed this around the executions and the aftermath of the executions, our topic is the relationship between Indonesia and Australia and not the details of the cases of Andrew Chan and Myuran Sukumaran. Although I certainly wouldn't want to rule that out as a topic of discussion later on. Okay, well, as I said, we don't want to reduce the relationship to stereotypes, but I would like people to think for a moment about things that they associate with Indonesia. I'm going to ask the Indonesians to do the opposite for Australia, by the way. I can remember when I first went to Indonesia. I first went to Indonesia as an exchange student, and I was assigned Indonesia. I didn't choose Indonesia. Indonesia chose me. And when I got given the assignment of going to Indonesia, I suddenly realised there was this big blurry area to the north of Australia that I hadn't really thought about. And I think that can be the case for a lot of us, even amongst very well-educated Australians. So I want you to list in your head, not necessarily on paper, two things that you personally associate with Indonesia, and two things that you think outside there on the street people normally associate with Indonesia, whether that's something picked up from the mass media or whatever. For the Indonesians here, I might try and turn this mic on and just do a little test now. Okay, is that okay? We've got sound? No. At the back. Okay, there. If I raise my voice, it's nice and loud. Okay, so teman-teman dari Indonesia, pilihlah atau pikirkan dua hal yang Anda sendiri, Anda pribadi kaitkan dengan Australia, dan dua hal yang menurut Anda orang biasa di Indonesia akan mengkaitkan dengan Indonesia. Okay. Australia, maaf. Okay. So, there's a nice, very...
Indonesian Army in Timor.
Oh, Indonesian Army in Timor. Okay. I might start with the Indonesians first, since we are trying to think from both ends. So, dari teman-teman dari Indonesia, kalau Anda pikir tentang Indonesia, apa yang muncul dalam pikiran tentang Australia? Anything? Yeah.
First, two things.
Yeah.
Because I come from the other end of Indonesia. The first thing that comes to my mind when I think about Australia is one of the first countries who assist this person with having a response where they.
Okay.
So that one biggest thing that have big memory.
You're from Aceh or not Sumatra?
I'm from
Aceh.
So that one thing. And secondly, when I think about Australia, is conflict path.
Convicts. Oh yes.
That two things.
So what do you think ordinary Indonesians think about when they think about Australia? If you just ask somebody on the street, tell me something about Australia, what do you reckon they're going to say?
Well, I mean, where I come from is Australia is apart from day-to-day life is what Australian did. But the biggest thing among people there actually is about the tsunami response.
Yeah, well, it's very interesting. It shows that that aid has a very positive impact, particularly, I would say, obviously, in Aceh and Sumatra. I was thinking somebody might come up with that, or somebody might come up with this. as well.
Yeah.
This is from some famous cartoonists in Indonesia, Benny and Mice. The writing up the corner there says, for some foreigners, and in the case of Kuta, because this is Kuta, of course, Bali is like their own backyard. And of course, the thing is that, well, I don't know too many Australians who act the same way in Kuta that they do in their backyard. But you can see a particular stereotype, which is people running around very loudly, drinking a lot without much on. So that's an element from the other end of the relationship. I'm sorry. Oh yes, I didn't ask you Australians to come up with something. Let's have a nice picture of each. So, Australians, Timor we had. What else have we got?
No robles.
No road books. That comes from personal experience. Anything else?
Borobudur.
Borobudur, fantastic. Fantastic. Got a great audience, I think. What do you think ordinary people think, though? Like if you beach?
Bali.
Okay.
Bali.
Bali. Okay, interesting. When I was trying to guess what you would say, I thought somebody might think of terrorists, or maybe they might think of poverty, or weird things, the weird, odd things that turn up in the media, like the chain-smoking baby from, was that about a year ago? Or you might even think about this, which, for all its problems, was actually a positive pop culture image of Indonesia. So the romance between Rhonda and Ketut. Okay. I'm going to argue, though, that if we walk out on the street and we talk to people about images they might have of Indonesia, two key things that may come up repeatedly might be Bali, and I think beyond that, the aid that we give, or this idea that Indonesia is a country we give things to, so it's a poor country. And so that's reflected in the two key responses that we had to the executions. The first was boycott Bali, and the second was cut aid. And it's worth asking the question: are either of these things worth doing? If we do feel that Indonesia has acted inappropriately as far as their relationship to Australia is, or the government's relationship to Australia is. First thing to be said, I think, is that the short answer to the question of whether or not it's a good idea to cut aid, I think, is clearly no. I don't know if it's worth thinking about for the discussion, if there's anybody here who thinks it is worthwhile. But when we're thinking about aid, of course, it's never neutral. It's never a matter of it just being about giving money to somebody, but of course there's always something in it for the donor country as well. And in the case of Australia, we have in this very room one set of examples of the benefits of that aid, in that a number of the Indonesians who are here on scholarships, which are part of Australia's aid budget. And the benefits to Australia of that are obvious. For a start, if we just think about where the money goes, it is boomerang aid in the sense that Indonesians get the scholarships here and they spend it here on the whole. Which is not to say that it's not a good thing to do, it's just a recognition of the spin-offs of that aid. And of course the benefits go well beyond that, because if there are more Indonesians coming to Australia, spending a significant amount of time here, it means that there are more Indonesians who are knowledgeable about Australia, network with Australia, and identify with Australia in a variety of different ways. And by cutting aid, we are cutting ourselves off from those benefits. Okay. The other thing to be said about this idea of cutting aid, which is very important from the other end of the relationship, is that it has particular historical resonance. And that resonance is to do with the way that Indonesians feel aid has been used in the past. And if you start talking about aid and problems with aid in Indonesia, Indonesians immediately think of the famous pronouncement of the nationalist leader and first president of Indonesia, President Sukumaran, who told the US, go to hell with your aid, because he felt that the US was using aid to try and manipulate Indonesia politically for what he viewed as US imperial ends. Okay. The second stereotype, which none of you came up with, I guess, thankfully, but which I think is prevalent, which is this idea of poverty, which is why the idea of aid is so prominent. We're giving these poor people all this money. I think is also very problematic. Earlier we saw some pictures of poor people, which exist in Indonesia, of course, of the very small number of extremists, Islamic extremists in Indonesia, which exist but are a tiny, tiny proportion of what is Indonesia. But we could easily have had any number of other images. We could have had images of Indonesia on the world stage as an organiser of big events. We could have had Indonesia as industrial power. And by the way, one of the big exports or imports to Tasmania from Indonesia in recent years has been heavy equipment. I think that was to do with boat building or something a couple of years back. Anyway, or maybe Indonesia's Miss Universe, or maybe any number of young Indonesians twittering or Facebooking their life away in what is the most socially networked country on earth. Okay, back to this issue of Indonesia as a poor country. Oops. Now, these are estimates. There we go. These are estimates by PricewaterhouseCoopers of the real economy of a number of key economies in the world and Australia. And you can see here that even right now, Indonesia's economy is substantially bigger than Australia's in real terms. But if we project forward just 15 years, that gap has become much bigger. If we project forward 35 years, that gap is even bigger still. And it's projected by 2050, which you would expect in a country of a population like Indonesia's, that Indonesia will be the fourth largest economy in the world. Having said that, of course, way behind the super big economies of US, India and China. So Indonesia is actually a rich country. It's a rich country that has a number of poor people, like most countries in the world have poor people, to a greater or lesser extent, but it's also a country which has a lot of wealth. And so therefore is not, as perhaps some people imagine, this poor Pacific country that if we cut off their aid, the economy is going to collapse. The second response, boycott barley, reflects that second stereotype, which is Indonesia is barley and wheat groups. Sorry about that. Giving things away. Okay. Yeah, if we go back to this earlier map, there's barley for you. One of 34 provinces, a small province, relatively. And boycotting barley really only hurts a small regional economy. It doesn't have any great significance nationally. So why are we stuck in these responses, which I think are actually rooted in the stereotypes that I talked about earlier. One issue that I'd like to point to is our historical legacy as an outpost of the British Empire and a European settler colony. So we kind of have an imagined neighbourhood, which I'm calling the Eurovision version of our neighbourhood. Not too bad for Tasmania, I might note if it was possible, I'd take this any day of the week. Warm water, good surf, close to Marco. Unfortunately, not likely to happen anytime soon. I apologise for the animation, but I couldn't help myself. This is the reality, of course. Australia well and truly in the Asia Pacific. So there's a disconnect between our imagined neighbourhood and our actual neighbourhood. But to be good neighbours, we need to actually know each other quite well. And, you know, a fantasy that puts you a long way away doesn't do that. And of course, that's one of the benefits of things like Australia's aid program. It brings Indonesians here, it sends Australians to Indonesia, and it gets both ends of the relationship thinking about each other's problems. Okay. Now, this need to move our thinking away from an imagined home in the mid-North Atlantic and try and set up house where we actually are goes a long way back. It goes back to the very beginnings of our relationship with Indonesia. And if you'll indulge me for a moment, I want to talk a little bit about that beginning, because I think it's an important example of what's possible. During World War II, people may not know, but there were between 5,000 and 10,000 Indonesians in Australia during World War II. And in a population of 8 million, that's actually quite a lot. Those people made relationships here. They joined churches, unions, other organisations. They took part in the war effort and so on. But they were doing all this in a situation of Australia being very much still part of the British Empire. So we didn't have Commonwealth Games in those days, we had Empire Games. And officially at least, colonialism was supported. Colonialism throughout the world was supported by the Australian government. It was reflected in all sorts of things. It was reflected in a racist white Australian policy, and it was reflected in the fact that both the Liberal and Labor Party and both of the key allies of Indonesia supported the return of Dutch colonialism to Indonesia. The reason why those 5,000 to 10,000 people were in Australia is because Indonesia was occupied by the Japanese, and so the Dutch colonial government moved to Australia. Just want to show you a very short snippet of a famous film that was made to support a campaign in Australia to support Indonesia's independence, which was declared right at the end of World War II. Again, think of the context. This is still in a context of British colonialism being the thing and government policy being well and truly supporting colonialism.
Let's start at the beginning. Here in Australia, we know the Indonesians well. For years they've lived in our country as friends and fellow townsmen. The women learned the names of our vegetables. And mothers found that children were much the same in any language. They were the Indonesian soldiers and seamen. Our boys knew them as good fighters against the common enemy, Japan. At our victory loan rallies in Martin Place, we applauded their musicians, lending their support in thousands of pounds, as well as music. We liked their old Indonesian folk song, even if we didn't understand the words. here in Australia, it wasn't just the river and rice fields, the villages of their homeland they thought about, but something they didn't have before the war, something they fought for with the Allies, independence.
You can see there, I mean, in lots of ways it's a very dated film and you'd expect that. This is 70 years old now. But you can see some things that actually ring quite modern as well, like this endeavour to build a human link to Indonesia. So Indonesians are just like us, they're different but they're kind of like us, and we should identify with them. They do things for us, we do things for them. So it's actually quite an equal imagining of the relationship between Indonesia and Australia. I might say that campaign was massive and completely turned around government policy, and also I think turned around many people's views of Australia's place in the world and of Asia. To give you an example, I'll give you a couple of examples if I can. Just a very, very brief snippet. This is a demonstration.
At a record meeting in Spain, this returned soldier reported that Indonesians have already proved they could govern their own country. In the name of my republic, I thank you, said Jan Willano. But for your help in holding up those ships, our republic might have been destroyed. The black ban on ships for Indonesia is complete.
Okay, so the black ban holding back ships that were carrying armaments and carrying soldiers back to Indonesia to re-establish colonialism. Now, just to give you an example of how I think that transformed people's views of Indonesia, of Australia's relationship to Indonesia and Australia's place in the world. This is just taken from a small newspaper in Perth in 1951, so this is directly after the struggle for independence has been effectively won by the Indonesians. And this is from a children's page. It's written by, quote-unquote, Aunt Mary. And she's talking about Indonesia, which itself was a new term. So if you look for Indonesia in Australian papers, you don't find much before the early 40s, and then it takes off in the late 40s and 50s. What she talks about is the fact that there is this place next door, and it's as if, she says, we were looking at it through binoculars the wrong way round. It was actually right next door, but we thought it was a long way away and that it was strange. And it's quite an apt way, I think, of still thinking about how we seem to see the relationship. We seem to see this country that's right next door as something that's far away, that's, for me, it was blurry before I went to Indonesia. And perhaps we still need, as Aunt Mary says, to develop a new large view of Indonesia. Okay. So, what can we do to bridge this gap between where we actually are and our imagined location? And the reason why we have that gap, of course, is, well, the distance geographically mightn't be much, but in some ways, culturally and historically, the gap is quite large. I'd say one key starting point would be improving our knowledge of Indonesia. And I think that surely starts, and this is me beating my drum, starts with Indonesian language and Indonesian studies education. Unfortunately, all levels of Indonesian language and Indonesian studies education in Australia has been in crisis for some time now. And people are beginning to talk about it being near extinction, an endangered species, if you like. Unfortunately, now that is starting to come together with a weakening of a government-to-government relationship. Until quite recently, the President of Indonesia was Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono, SBY. You can see why they called him SBY. And he ruled Indonesia for 10 years. He's the first Indonesian president to manage to do one term after democratisation in 1998, and then he won re-election, so 2 lots of 5 years, 10 years. He was very pro-Australian. He had family members who studied, kids who studied in Australia. He thought very fondly of Australia. But then towards the end of his time, the Snowden revelations made it clear that Australia had been tapping not just his phone, but the phones of a number of his family members, including his wife. And this was a particularly sensitive matter in Indonesia. It was seen as treating a friend as an enemy. As it happens, this was happening at the same time that similar revelations were made about American spying on the German Chancellor, Angela Merkel. And to make things worse, there was a real contrast between the way President Obama handled the situation and the way our Prime Minister handled the situation. President Obama apologised to the Chancellor, even though the US is obviously the senior partner in the relationship with Germany, and made a commitment that it wouldn't happen again. Tony Abbott was not prepared to make any apology whatsoever, not prepared to make any commitment whatsoever, not even a commitment, for instance, not to tap the phone of SBY's wife. And this is despite the fact it actually happened under a Labor government. It's David Pope's take on his response. Obviously, people don't watch Jamie. Okay, and this was SBY's tweet, and it's quite amazing that he felt so moved that he actually tweeted about it. For the Indonesians here, or anybody who speaks Indonesian, I would translate that as sakitnya tuh di sini. Famous dangdut song. Okay. Now, we have a new president. He's quite different from SBY. He comes from a business background, he comes from a regional background. He's not a person who's that interested in foreign affairs. He's not a person with any links to Australia. He, and it seems many other people in the political elite in Indonesia, have drawn the conclusion that maybe Australia isn't that much of a friend. Maybe it's not worth putting yourself out there that much for Australia. And you can see that in his response to the eventual, both the threat of and the cut state. He basically said, so Australia potong bantuan, so it's the right of Australia to cut aid. Masa mau nangis, why shed a tear? Which is kind of a yeah, whatever response. No skin off my nose. So I guess that's a grim state of affairs I've painted. So I'll leave you with a little bit of a happy picture. I'm assuming everybody here is interested in the relationship between Indonesia and Australia and wants that relationship to be a healthy and productive one. And I think it's clear from what I'm arguing, I don't think that's the case at the moment. In fact, I think we're at something of a lower, perhaps the lowest step that we've been at in 50 years. So in that sort of situation, what can we do? I'm open to suggestions from the floor, but I might just pop a couple of ideas up. We need to be talking, I think, more to our friends and family about Indonesia. If we think the relationship's important, we should be talking more. Maybe learn a bit more about Indonesia. Try learning Indonesian language, travel a bit more to Indonesia and encourage other people to do the same. If the opportunity arises, your local Indonesian language program is under threat, or there's the possibility of setting one up. I know there's one school as a result of the Ogo program that's trying to set one up. Please support that. But also just get involved. I know that both the Indonesian community here and the Indonesian Student Society welcome Oh, I have to do one plug that I've promised before I finish up. And of course, one activity that you can get involved in is boycott. So there's a number of different things that you can get involved in. This is part of the Dark Mofo Festival, and next Friday, the 12th, is Kaz here, by the way? No, Kaz is not. Okay. Sorry. Tomorrow's as well. So tomorrow night at 6 p.m. In what is Dark Park, that's just behind the art school. Dark Mofo will be launched, and a key element of that will be a number of statues of gold that have been made by Balinese artists who are visiting. They're very approachable, so it's an opportunity to talk directly to a number of Indonesians. I'm sure a lot of Indonesians will be there. There's a lot of other activities as well. The Ogor can be part of the fun and parade as well. It's all on